So I just finished watching this video of this woman making food for Thanksgiving, and she was talking about the history of Black Americans and Thanksgiving. And she was talking about how Thanksgiving was one of the first holidays that people who were enslaved were allowed to celebrate. And like many Americans, specifically white Americans who learned about slavery, I'm realizing that my education around the entire topic in history is so skewed and flawed. And the amount of things that I've learned just by following Black creators on TikTok is more than I've ever learned in school. So then I started thinking about the conversations that I had with my parents about slavery when I started learning about it in school. And then it got me thinking, how do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children? Is it a conversation that's like you sit down and you lay everything out? Is it like something that you slowly reveal more information about because it's obviously a very traumatic topic? Or for anybody out there, was it something that your parents even talked to you about, or was it something that was like, oh, learned it in school? This is a 100% genuine question, and I just want to learn the differences of how Black families teach about slavery versus white families.
Hello lovelies, welcome back to today's episode. This white man went viral after asking this same question because according to him, he wants to know how Black people teach their kids about slavery. According to him, he's trying to say that what my white family taught me about slavery, it's totally different of what I learned from Black creators or in a school. Means what they taught him, it was something even so different the way he's hearing right now. Let's get to hear what the Black people are talking about it. Let me know your thought in the comment section. Then we'll come back with more comments.
Thinking, how do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children?
There's a flaw in this question. And the question is, how do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children? There is no conversation about slavery because slavery isn't one thing. Slavery was an institution that permeated every aspect of our lives. So when you talk about different things, whether you're talking about food, whether you're talking about holidays, whether you're talking about education, anything, there's some way to relate it to slavery. Even when it comes to like my pops teaching us how to swim, and there was like a stereotype that Black people couldn't swim. And then he was like, yeah, because, during slavery, we weren't allowed to go to the swimming pools. And then during segregation, we weren't allowed to go to swimming pools. So white people had an idea that we couldn't swim. Like every aspect of your life that something's kind of wonky or fucked up, there's traces of slavery that go back through it. So it comes up quite often. And I think like this guy, he didn't have like a bad intention, but I think the way the question is phrased shows how poorly white people understand slavery and its effects coming through history. You know what I'm saying? Because you can't just sit down with your kids and be like, all right, well, let me talk to you about the 450 years that Black people were slaves. That's not going to happen, bro. That's not how any of this happens. So I'll just take, for example, he was talking about Thanksgiving, right? So whenever we would have Thanksgiving, I remember asking my parents, like, white people eat all this other shit, like, turkey and stuff. We had turkey and stuffing, but they had different dishes because I had white friends, so I knew. And I was like, why are our dishes different from theirs? And I remember my pops being like, well, Black people have always had different cuisine from white people because we didn't have the choice cuts of meat. We didn't have the best use of the vegetables. We had whatever we could get. And so we made very flavorful and very creative foods based on those things, right? Whatever we had access to. And that's why our food looks different from these other people's food, right? And that's just a small, quick summary of something about Thanksgiving, but it has a connection to slavery. And this would happen all the time, like all the time. When I asked my dad about, why we were stereotyped as people couldn't swim, because he taught me how to swim, we would learn about that. When I asked him about Juneteenth, because we celebrated Juneteenth my whole life. Like, I know it recently became like a holiday in the past few years or something, but in Texas, it's always been a holiday because this is where it happened. You know what I'm saying? So that was always, there's not one conversation about slavery. And there's no way for you to like understand that if you think that slavery was just one thing. Slavery was America. And that's like, how do white people talk to their kids about America? They don't. They just live America. And that's kind of how we live our history, which, involved the enslavement of Africans.
Don't. Mine didn't. I had to learn about racism through experiencing it. So I'm a continental African, and I spent most of my life living on the continent, which means I have a certain level of privilege, right? I grew up in predominantly black spaces. Even living in South Africa, I never experienced racism. That was never a thing. It wasn't until I moved to Switzerland. Mind you, this is a whole other country. I don't speak the language. I was 8 years old. On my first day of school, I was the only black person in my class. The first day of school, somebody says the N-word to me. I don't know what that is. I asked the teacher what that means. She's like, "Who said that to you?" "Oh, this kid said it to me." She sat me down. My teacher's white. My teacher sat me down and explained. I don't know why she was explaining this to an 8-year-old, but she explained it to me. And I was still confused because I was 8. I couldn't compute it. So I go back home to my parents and I tell them what happened. And the conversation was just never had. I just grew up in a world that was inherently racist, and I had to learn with the experiences. So I'm one of those kids that whose parents never said anything about it.
The conversation is never about, it never starts off about slavery. And that's what I want everybody on the opposite end to understand, that the conversations that we have to have with our children about it, it never just starts off with slavery. It starts off with some sort of microaggression, some sort of racism that they have experienced or we have experienced as a child, where we have to explain the origins of the racism. So it's not we just have a conversation about slavery. They have to experience a current effect of racism for us to start the conversation. And I think that's the most important part that we want y'all to realize. We don't live in the past of slavery, but we have to help our children understand, here is why you're being treated by that, the historical context of them. And it goes on and piece by piece by piece. This is when you start the conversation, is when that happens to them. And it's sad because all of our children, at some point, even myself, at some point have experienced or will experience. And if you're African American, and I mean African American, you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations in, you've in some sort of way experienced covert or overt racism. We wouldn't have to have these conversations if people were honest about the fact that the societal dehumanizing of Black Americans, and not even just in the U.S., globally, is because of the chattel slavery. And this is why we have these conversations. And it's sad that we have to start off like this, but for the most part, this is how we have to explain what's going on.
How do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children? Is it a
In Black families, the luxury of innocence is not a thing that children kind of have. And what I mean by that is, I don't think there's ever a time where we are completely sheltered from the truth of our own Blackness, because the inauguration to our human spirit as Black people is inherently trauma. Black children don't come of age until we experience racism for the first time here in this country. And because of that, we kind of have to be prepared for this consistent shadow that follows us throughout the rest of our life. Within that, the shadow of slavery and this implicit children that kind of preys on us. Our lives will be defined consistently by the exploitation of our bodies, the exploitation of our pain, but also the exploitation of our voices. And there's always little moments where the racism and the implicit hatred within this country, but also within this planet, plays against us. But Thanksgiving is kind of a time where those lessons become formalized. I think that's also why Thanksgiving is a very sacred holiday for Black Americans. Not specifically the Thanksgiving aspect, but the harvest and the gathering of family members, the prayer, the religious aspect, the spiritual practices, but also the collective sharing of stories that apply to us as a familial unit. No school has to tell us that we stole this country or the white man stole this country from the native populations and the indigenous populations, because we learn it. There's always the joke or the trope of the uncle who's always willing to tell you something messed up about this country when you're just trying to eat. The earliest stories I've ever experienced is my grandfather telling us the stories of when he was the eldest brother of my great aunts and my great uncles. back in Philadelphia, and the roaming troops of Irish and Italian men, grown white men, would prey upon black children, attack them, even black little girls in this country. And there's always a tone of resentment with that, because there's never a way for you to communicate the darkness that kind of festers in you, and the hatred and the resentment that belongs to those traumas, because there's no way to prepare your children for the moment that they experience something like that. We all kind of have our own slave narratives, and the reality and the implicit pain of slavery echoes into us in different ways. I think in Atlanta, even my mutual duck, who talks about their ongoing relationship with slavery and the conversation as Southerners is really important. But as a Northerner, well, not explicitly a Northerner, but as black families that live up north, we have a different connection to it. We have different conversations with it, because the South is the place that we left. What we experience is the monuments of capital and gain and currency that flows in and around us when we pass by any monument. Like when you go to Greenwich Village in Philadelphia, or you go to Germantown in Philadelphia, the awareness that you are walking across the graves of black families. There used to be little maroon towns, and there used to be little slave towns of freed and running away slaves. They used to populate these areas, but no longer do, because they were removed. You see idols to the greatness of America, but you see very little mention. And it's because of this that black families have to remind our children, everything you see truly does belong to you, because everything you see is the fruit of the labor of your kin. There are holidays that were especially sacred, like the Martin Luther King Day, which is a day off from school. But my mothers, my aunts made sure that those days were filled with education, as much education as possible, because you have to equip your children with the awareness of what they're capable of, but also what the opposition is capable of doing to you. It's especially like noteworthy why black Southerners are so against the bastardization of Juneteenth, because if it's a holiday that becomes about everyone, then the holiday loses its meaning in discussing and educating black youth, but also reconsidering and solidifying the black experience within our entire community across the country. For us and how we operate, slavery is not a noun, it's a verb, it's ongoing, it's never ending. And as such, unpacking the levels of it beyond even just theory, but within experience, and even your individual industries and your individual pursuits of dreams and goals, the conversation is never going to stop. It's always going to constantly evolve until the implicitness and the condition of slavery is no longer ongoing.
How do black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children?
Forgive me, I'm very sick. So for our household, I guess it was always a thing. I guess my earliest memory was in elementary school. There was a movie that they played about slavery in general. And I remember it because it terrified me as a kid. There was a song that they sung where the words were, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is coming to carry you home. Follow the drinking gourd. And so at a young age, it was there always. The old man had a regular foot and a peg foot, and you followed that trail to the river. And it was just, like we would watch it yearly. And that was just outside of the house. Like there was going from the third grade to the fourth and fifth grade holiday poster of this poster specifically that I looked at every time I was crossing up that ramp. My grandmother used to give tours around the city of Atlanta. And so again, from Atlanta, automatically let you know, like, we were never afraid of the conversation. It was never foreign to us, this conversation of black liberation, black history, slavery. She used to give us these tours. We were constantly going to the Baptist church, going to the King Center. So we were always around the knowledge of slavery. There's a museum called the Apex Museum here in the city. I highly recommend it. And there's a lot of positive stuff there, but to get to the positive stuff, you've got to go through the history of slavery. There are books that my folks just had lying around that talk about it. The first time I heard Emmett Till's name was in a book that I just found sitting in the house. And those books are still here. From like when I was very little, they're still here. Vacations with my grandmother were spent going to museums, going to marches. When I was in elementary school in fifth grade, I made it to the end of a Jeopardy tournament, and my grandmother took me to a cemetery and pointed out grave sites and talked about the history of African American people. And again, black schools, we were never afraid of the conversation of slavery. When Black History Month come around, it was not it was like we were working hard to teach you everything that happened at that point. So the real question comes into, at what point in your growth did you start to learn more? Because we always had it. It was always a conversation that was here. There was never we're going to sit down and have the slavery conversation. That never happened. It was always there. And it was at a point in yourself that you went out to learn more, that you put in the effort yourself to learn what was actually going on. We weren't given all the brutality and the realness of it because we're kids, but we weren't lied to. Like to this day, I can find the Big Dipper, Little Dipper, and the North Star no matter where I am because of that movie.
How do Black parents have the conversation about slavery with their children? First things first, I want to give a big thank you to Black academics for encouraging me to make a follow-up video on this question. One of the many ways that I was ignorant to this topic and this question originally was the assumption that I could just ask this and then move on without carrying on the conversation. I really appreciate their videos and their messages helping me better understand that this is an ever-going topic. This might be a longer video, so I apologize in advance, but there's a few people specifically who I wanted to point out that really helped me better understand this conversation I want to share with you guys. One of the first people I want to point out is Chumbalex, and I hope I'm saying that right. His video really helped me understand the flaw in the phrasing of my original question. In his video, he said that there's no conversation about slavery because slavery isn't just one thing. It's an institution that permeated every aspect of their lives. I think this highlights one of the biggest flaws in my education and education system in general revolving around slavery is that it is taught as if it's a piece of curriculum that you learn about and then move on from, as opposed to a topic that is ongoing that we continue to learn about and investigate. I would imagine this is a similar experience because I saw so many comments and stitches talking about how it's a lifelong conversation. So after seeing that video and many of your comments, I got a little bit of a better idea of where to start. As opposed to my experience growing up in a predominantly white area where slavery was kind of taught as like this chapter that began in like middle school, it's a conversation that has always been there and it continues to get expanded upon. The next person whose video I want to point out is Duck, because I think their video and what they said was a great example of like, here's the starting point and where do we go from here? They said the real question comes into at what point in your growth did you start to learn more about it? Because we always had it. It was always a conversation that was here. And it was at a point in yourself that you just went out to learn more. This I think was really important because it highlights a lot of what we lack, specifically myself, after we learn about slavery. I think this highlights where a lot of people's education system, mine specifically, fell short when covering the conversation of slavery, was that it is kind of treated as a topic like multiplication or whatever. Like after you learn it, you move on. That's something that I really got from a lot of your responses is once you learn about it, you continue to learn about it and then you learn about it some more. And that is something that I'm actively trying to do more of. The other thing that I saw a lot of in the comments in the videos was that people watch Roots. Their parents had them watch Roots or other documentaries. Those are just two comments specifically of the hundreds of people who said that. And I remember my mom having my sister and I watch Roots, but it did seem like it was a part of the curriculum still. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to watch this and now this opens up to a broader conversation. Alicia's comment here describes exactly that. Like that was the start of it, but then it was a ongoing lifelong conversation. Part of the reason I asked this question to TikTok was so that I could learn from people with wildly different experiences from each other. Because as soon as people started responding, I realized like, oh, this isn't just like a one size fits all conversation. Like it varies. It depends on person to person. This comment from Jai kind of surprised me. Black parents actually don't talk to us about slavery. We learn more about slavery in school. This comment kind of surprised me and it helped me realize that there are so many other factors that contribute to this. I saw this video from Steven who talked about the differences between Black families in the North versus the South. One of the things they said was Black families that live up North have different conversations and different connections to slavery because the South was the place where they left. When I first asked this question, it didn't even occur to me that geography could have played a big factor in how families have this discourse with their kids. Definitely think part of my ignorance around the topic of slavery comes from growing up in a predominantly white area in Seattle. The education system in Seattle and Washington as a whole, if I'm being honest, are severely lacking the depth that is needed to cover certain parts of our history. So many people don't even know that Seattle is named after Chief Seattle. Speaking of families, there's another thing that was brought up quite a bit in the comments and the stitches that I think is really important to highlight. For white families, it doesn't seem super common to ask your grandparents or your great-grandparents about slavery or about segregation. The video that specifically talked about this was from a creator, Body Image Babe, which also I'm realizing I forgot screenshots for like most of these people, so I apologize. They will be tagged below. It talks about how they didn't have like a sit-down conversation with their parents about slavery, but they learned a lot from their family's history and piecing together their lineage. This was something that was brought up a good amount in the comments and in the stitches, was that a lot of people didn't learn the majority of what they know about slavery through books or through movies, whatever, but from family members. I learned an unbelievable amount from all of your responses, and I really appreciate that. And I understand that this also doesn't even scratch the surface. For anybody who shared these stories and expressed this vulnerability, I really appreciate you taking the time out to help educate me, because you didn't need to. In school, I learned about slavery in a very cookie cutter way that took 400 plus years of history and put it into one chapter. One of the biggest things I've learned from all of you is that there's no one way to learn about slavery, but the wrong way to approach it is to think you finished learning.
When you try to hear this white man, after he came out to ask this question to Black people, how they teach their kids, their generation about slavery, even if they do something like that, you could understand how a lot of Black people are trying to say this is not something we are used to tell our small kids, because the history of Black history, each and everything, the journey of 400 years of oppression, till we are still passing it through in this modern slavery. It's not something really easier to talk about on our kids, especially on their young age, because we don't want to make them traumatized. We don't want to build them in a world of scaring, of or losing confidence. When you try to hear each and everything connect to Black people, it's connected to the pain, the struggle, the oppression. It is something, if you are a parent, it's not even easy to sit them down to talk about each and everything. This white man, when you try to hear him, he's trying to say, I grew up in my family telling me about slavery, but what I heard from Black people or in my school, it was totally different from what I heard from my parents. Means what these white people tell their kids, you could understand it. They add spices, they add something which was not real. No wonder this white man, after grew up, she had that courage to come out and say, let me ask Black people, maybe they will answer my question, because I have a lot of questions I need to have the answer. That's how he came out to ask this same question. But when you try to hear the way Black people are trying to express their feelings, it is something even really bad to hear. It's something you could even understand when you have a small kids like 2 years, 3 years to 7 years, 9 years. It's not easier to tell them, see, we are Black people, we are passing through this, we are the most hated people on this land. You need to be careful, you know, this and that, don't do this, don't do that. It's really scaring as a parents. But this time around, in this century, in this new era, when you try to see the racism, the way it's keeping going high, it keep being expensive in all corners of America, I think this is the right time parents should stop that strategy of back days and try to bring these slavery stories in their kids, because it's going to help them in one way or the other. When you try to see that video, this lady was saying, my parents never told me anything about slavery or Black people until I heard the N words at my school. I didn't know the meaning of each and everything until I came to my parents to ask them each and everything. That's when they started to teach me each and everything I need to know about Black people and Black history and slavery. But this time around, if you would sit there watching your kids going to school, you don't want to talk about anything about slavery. Yes, I understand. You want to protect them. You don't want to have that trauma. You don't want them to be hurted hearing this story. But I think it's important. It's a must to let them know. I've heard some people, they keep saying, my parents proposed me to watch Ruth's movie so that I could see myself what really happened during slavery. But I don't think it is something really enough. You hear some people also, they are saying, my parents were waiting to see something happening like discrimination or quarrel or the violence. It's where they will start that story to tell us about slavery. But you have heard on the side of these white people, they grew up telling them about the Black people history, about slavery. Why these white people, they have the courage to tell their kids about slavery, and yet they never passed through that trauma? Why Black people, they would hold this history as a secret far away from their kids? I don't think this is something you would encourage people to do. People need to stand up. If you are a parent, stand up, try to tell your kids, try to bought a lot of books talking about the Black history and slavery. Kids in nowadays, they have a lot of curiosity to know what is really happening, because when they are going in school, they are getting bullied here and there. Whenever they are going in a restaurant, they are getting this sort of racism. But when you train them in their ages to know each and everything connected to their history, I think it will help them in one way or the other. But if you left them to discover each and everything by themselves, they may get lied by some people else. And yet you are there, you are parents, you know each and everything, how each and everything happened. When we are trying to tell our kids about slavery, it doesn't mean you are trying to traumatize them. Though some parents, that's what they are trying to say. I don't want my kids to grow in this environment of the past. It's the past. But remember, it is something which is always connected to you till the end. You can't delete black history. You can't delete what happened. Yet, it happened to your ancestors. But remember, it brings a lot of memories, and you are still testifying yourself what is really happening on your side. It's already identical to what happened to your ancestors. If you keep away this information away from your kids, I don't think it's something really good. And when you try to hear very well, during this period of slavery, what really happened, it's more than what we know right now. Because when you try to see a lot of people who were there, who are still alive nowadays, when they bring that law history from their own eyes, you even lost words to say, because that period, it was really something else. No wonder when we are talking about black history, people need to be very, very, very careful. You need to have time to understand black history. You need to have that courage to hear anything connected to black history, because there is no any way you will allow some people to teach your kids about slavery when you are there. You have heard this white man is trying to say, in our school, they've been tell us about slavery, but they never went deeper. But when we talk about black people, you would hear them saying, we never hear something like this in our school. They don't want to tell us each and everything connected to slavery. Imagine. And you were there, you don't want to talk anything about it. It's not something embarrassing. It's not something bad to say. You hear this kid saying, I've never seen my parents sit me down and start from A to Z about slavery, how each and everything started. And I wish if they would tell me something like this, it would be help me in one way or the other. Why would they waiting for me to do a research by myself? Why would they refer me to go and watch Roots movie? Now you see, these kids, when you are sitting with them, they will ask you some questions. They will try to compare it with this life they are living in nowadays. No wonder they need you. You need to tell them. Don't tell them each and everything, but try to make them have some enough information about slavery. Because if this racism is keeping hurting them in nowadays, they are keep passing through all this. Even you as an adult, it's a stressing to live in this world of racism. You are passing through a lot at your workplace. Each and everything is about racism. Discrimination, it never stopped. Oppression, it never stopped. Each and everything is practicing in a modern way, and you don't want someone from you to know anything about it. You are just sitting there waiting for them to know by themselves. Guys, let me know what you think today's episode. Drop your thought in the comment section. Thank you. See you in my next episode.